Okay, welcome everybody to our next conversation about mental health. Today it's Sal Crispo, founder of V10 Health, and myself, David Hurdle, holistic lifestyle coach. And we're going to be continuing on with our conversations about mental health. And today we're going to be talking about depression. So, last conversation we had was about anxiety, and we went over what we thought anxiety was and tips to help move you through the process. And so we're going to do the same today. Uh, Sal Crispo has had some personal experience with this, as have I. So we not only have sort of the theory in the background, we've actually been through it. So we're coming from personal experiences here. So hopefully that will come through in our discussion, and hopefully this will be able to help some people. So enjoy. So Sal, I don't know if you want to start off, and maybe if you just want to talk about what are sort of the symptoms of depression, and how does someone know when they are depressed?
Yes, thank you for the introduction there, Dave. I want to stress before we begin, and I answer that question, that you did an amazing job in the first podcast with anxiety, and a lot of the information and tips and strategies that Dave shared in that podcast pertains to depression as well. You're going to have a lot of crossover. They're related. It's very difficult to have just one and not at least a little bit of the other. So if you haven't watched part one, I strongly urge that you do, because it can be helpful even if you are struggling with depression more than anxiety. With that said, yeah, Dave, like depression is, a disease. We know that now. Growing up, I was a silent sufferer. I did not know what depression was. I mean, I was very, very young when I got my, it's basically my first memory of depression. It was probably when I was about 4.5, 5 years old. And I knew it was different. It was different than, just feeling sad. There was something more than that. So uh, the symptoms, if I had to describe them, it would be like just a sense of pure hopelessness, helplessness, and just utter despair. You really think like it's just never going to end. You're always going to suffer and struggle and have this dark cloud just always in the background. It's just always there. Even when you're feeling good, even when you're laughing, people think, oh, you're depressed, you don't experience, those types. No, I experienced all of those. It was just that this dark cloud was ever present. It was always there. And it was just really sucking the beauty, if you will, out of life. And yeah, and you just, like I said, you don't see an end in sight. So it's like this vicious cycle of ups and downs, because there's sometimes where it gets just so bad that you don't really want to continue living anymore. And on top of that, I would say that you know it's not easy. I mean, no matter what, no one's going to tell you what it feels like. So it's hard to describe in words. Words could only, uh, give it a little bit of justice. But until you go through it, it is very hard to communicate to someone who hasn't felt it or experienced. Um, and it is very common. It's which would have been great to know when I was going through it. I thought there was just something wrong with me, right? And I thought it was just me. But the WHO estimates about 264 million people suffer, but I really do think it's a lot more than that. Um, because just like I was a silent sufferer, I'm positive that there's a lot more people who are suffering in silence,
Yep.
whether it is because they're too proud or too afraid to share and open up, and or just avoiding it altogether, and doing things to just take their mind off of it, and you know, uh, yeah, just not feel the full intensity of the inner struggle and pain.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think what you said there, especially about the silent suffering, I think that's huge. I mean, that was definitely my experience as well. Part of it was just I couldn't label or put a finger on what I was feeling. It was just like heavy all the time. It was just like, for me, there was just this weight and this burden that just wouldn't wouldn't let up. Uh, and so yeah, the silent suffering, and even when people close to me started to point out that maybe I should go see someone, it was still nope. Like, I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to face it or deal with it, or or maybe there was just too much shame, right? You think something's wrong with you and you're broken. So uh, I think that's part of what sort of, at least for me, it sort of made it worse. Is the suffering in silence part for sure. Um, Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Dave. Um, the shame was a big thing for me as well. I mean, that resonates because I had a great life, right? I didn't have a life where, I was abused, physically, mentally, I was in, poverty, or, I didn't have any good reason to be depressed. And I think that's what made it worse. Not that I wanted something bad to happen, but I mean, it made it worse in terms of the shame. Like, I thought, oh, maybe I'm just being a spoiled brat. I just not grateful for what I have, and so that uh, was very difficult to face, right? So I saw people around me who actually had diseases that were apparent, right? I In school I had a good friend of mine who passed away, but we saw him deteriorate, right? We saw him go from this beautiful always happy, joyous boy, and he was suffering with leukemia. It was the first time I had heard of cancer, and we saw him just, like I said, deteriorate to the point where he was unrecognizable.
Right.
Um, and yet he was still so overjoyed every time he saw us, and I could feel that it was real. And yet I'm like, here I am, I'm not going through remotely what he's going through, because again, I didn't know it was a disease. um, and what happened was, again, yeah, you just feel guilty and shameful about it, and you don't want to express it to other people because you sort of think like, oh, that's what they're going to think of you, like, oh, you're just being a baby or whatever, right? Especially as a male, right? Like we talked about in the previous video,
Right.
hard to share emotions, especially when it comes across as a weakness.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. So just in terms of depression, then, um, since your philosophy and my philosophy align, where we kind of look at the whole picture, we just don't look at one thing. We look at the whole picture of a person's life. We look at their physical and their mental and their emotional and their spiritual components and aspects of their life. Would you say that uh, there is a contributing factor or causative factor that's more related to one? Is it more physical? Is it more mental? Or what would you say? Is it more related to maybe a sum total of different components from each?
Yes, I would definitely say there are imbalances in all three. Now, it's not going to be the same for everyone. Everyone is unique, so they'll be struggling in different areas. But overall, there's going to be an imbalance. So for me, I started with the physical. I was, looking for, a way to feel better. So I started with, exercise, and, I really started to develop myself physically, which it did help me feel better, but it in no way did it heal me. Um, but I knew that at least I was on the right track, that maybe I could find an answer to this, even though, I did have those feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. I was driven because I knew there was no other way out of this. I mean, you know, and I didn't, at least at the time, want to consider, suicide. Um, and for me, yeah, I said, okay, well, maybe if it's not in the physical, maybe I can find it somewhere else. So I started looking at the, mental aspects, and I started reading. Um, and reading had a, very good impact on my life, um, because you start to realize that you don't know how your mind works. uh, you're not given a manual, you're not taught this in school, um, and what you realize that you can really shape your mind and reshape your thinking, uh, and your intentions, your beliefs, I mean, etc. um, and that will affect your life. Then you can start implementing those and changing your habits and your thought patterns and all these things. Then yeah, you definitely start to again feel better. So I felt an improvement, uh, but still, even though I was thinking clearly and uh, you know feeling like I was thinking the right things, uh, the depression was still there, because for me, the key factor was spiritual, right? For me, that's what healed me in the end. And now it definitely was a holistic thing where if I didn't do the physical, right, like, you know, exercising and moving helped me build great momentum. Then I started, eating better too, and that contributed to feeling better, because there are some foods that can affect your mood. For instance, dairy. I don't do well with dairy. If I start consuming dairy, I'll get like instantaneous effects. I'll feel my mood change. I'll feel my digestion, um, you know, start to, suffer, and so on. So, and then with the mental aspects, that was good. I became more efficient at achieving my goals, um, and creating things around me uh, that I liked, but I still felt this darkness and heaviness, like you claimed, around me and on me and pressing down on me all the time. So, for me, again, it was more spiritual. And why did I leave it to the end? Well, that's because I grew up with religion, a strong, a strong religious, I guess, family, right? And the influence was just a lot, and I respect that. Don't get me wrong, I respect religion, but I guess that drove me away from spirituality, because I thought it was the same thing. Again, it was just due to ignorance.
Yep.
And what I didn't like about religion, because now I respect it and I understand the good parts of it, going through what I went through. But at the time, it was the dogmatic parts that I didn't like, the parts that, you know, uh, say, you have to do this, and you have to, things that just didn't make sense and didn't resonate with me, or they were controversial, or they were hypocritical. It just, things just didn't add up, and it just left me more confused and feeling worse every time I try to implement those teachings, because again, I think the teachings were, um, I guess, just I don't know what the right word would be. I guess the teachings were uh, not conveyed in the right way, right? Like I wouldn't teach the certain passages the way some of the priests were teaching them. I think they misinterpreted them, or at least for me, I feel like they misinterpreted them and they didn't resonate with me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, uh, yeah, anyways, so that was, just a, drop in the bucket in terms of my journey. So once I, uh, you know, went from being completely disconnected spiritually to then being connected, um, to my sense of spirit or soul or self, like, and I stopped suppressing my natural soul expression, then I went from a state of surviving to a state of thriving, right?
Right.
So completely different. And yeah, that, so again, to answer your question, yeah, it's going to be different for everyone, but if you focus on evolving all three of those parts, um, and you learn how to integrate and balance them so they work together as a team, I feel like you could significantly um, help, maybe even heal and conquer your depression.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So it's interesting that you sort of went physical first and then sort of mental, emotional, and then spiritual, because that was very much the sorry, the layout of how mine went as well. And um, I like what you said earlier about you don't have a book on how the mind works, because I think that is a huge part of it. I think there's a lot to, and what helped with me in meditation and insight and observation and self reflection, and really taking a good look at what thoughts were coming up in my head. And I didn't realize uh, how much of my thoughts were self critical and self judgmental and just being extremely oppressive and hard on myself all the time. Even if that's manifests as a perfectionist, uh, behavior, because it's still not good enough no matter what, right? And so I think there's a weight um, of constant on the mental, emotional side. I think there's just a weight of constant, even if it's unconscious, like if you're not aware of it. In the beginning, I was not, just because I never paid attention. Um, there's a constant weight of self judgment, self criticism, lack of self belief, and shame. And all of that is just spinning on in the background. And for me, I wasn't really aware of it until I started meditating and becoming still and quiet, and learning to watch all this stuff come up. And it's like, holy moly, right? And I think some of that is just maybe our inherent nature, but I think a lot of it is imprinted too. And back to what you said about religion, I mean, there's religion does a wonderful job at giving people shame, right? If it's not taught in the correct way, you are born into sin, and you automatically are not good enough from the moment you come into this reality. And unfortunately, that's, I think, for some people, where a lot of their feelings of shame come from, is they just have that imprint that's from really strong religious backgrounds. And I've noticed that in some other people that I know, when they come from really strong religious strict families, that imprint sort of comes in there and becomes a tough barrier to overcome. But with relative to what was physical and mental and spiritual for me, probably the biggest, this is where we're a little different. My journey was uh, more related to burnout, my physical part of it. So I had been a hyper exerciser, a hyper worker. Like, I was burning the candle at both ends for a long time. And I wasn't sleeping the best because I was so driven early on in my career. that my physical resources just crapped out on me.
Mhm.
Right. And so my journey for the physical was actually the opposite. Where you started exercising, I actually had to cut back because my body was just depleted. And so with the physical causes, we know that if your thyroid is burnt out, or if your adrenals are burnt out, that's going to be a physical contributing factor towards depression, because your body just doesn't have the physical chemical resources to keep your mind, your mood, and your body,
Mhm.
at a operating efficiently and feeling well. So yeah, for me, a lot of it was actually just having to like scale back, and so I mean, everybody has to know where they are relative in the spectrum. So exercise can help some people, absolutely, but if you're on the other end of the spectrum where you just burn the candle at both ends for so long and your body's just depleted, then it's always about coming back to the middle, right? And just uh,
Mhm.
and just healing and nourishing the body, and nutrition and nourishing the body was a huge part of it for me too.
Mhm.
But then yeah, so in the same order you, it was physical, it was mental, and then the spiritual came after.
Mhm.
When I think when you're still not feeling, maybe you're noticing improvements here and there a little bit, but when you're still carrying that heaviness around you all the time, it just drives you to look for more. And if the answer is not physical, if it's not mental, it's not emotional, and I'm still feeling this way, then what else is left, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's kind of the last thing uh, that you kind of have to go to, which is where uh, that was the last part for me that sort of helps bring me back into myself, and into sort of coming out of it. How long was yours, if you don't mind me asking?
Um, so I finally healed at the age of 25, and like I said, my first memories were about 4.5, 5. So it was a good solid 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how long would you say, when, like, once you started exercising, if we say that as maybe an early launch point for moving up from that point to when you started to feel sort
Hmm.
of whole again, how many years would you say that was?
Well, I'm trying to think. So it was about I was about 18 when, I took, like, I always played sports. I was always active, right? It was that wasn't an issue. It slowed down definitely in high school. So when I got, when I was 18 years old, when I came out of high school, I was, more lost than ever, because, it was just such a negative state of mind and being, that school was like torture. So I was just, happy to finally graduate from high school, but then I didn't have any ambitions, right, or to continue on after that. So I was like just working and trying to like keep my mind off of things and partying. So the one good thing that came out of that is a friend of mine uh, phoned me and said, "Hey, I started doing some kickboxing and kung fu, martial arts classes. Why don't you come try it?" And thank goodness he did, because that was probably one of the lowest points in my life. I was suicidal at that time, and so I just went and tried the classes, and so that started at 18, and that made, just me focus on something else instead of being alone, because that was a big thing. Was every time I was alone, um, that's when I felt it the most. So I was trying to keep myself busy and distracted, and then so this was a good positive distraction,
Right.
but it was a combination of positives and negatives. I was doing that and then partying at the same time. But then, yeah, so I went from about 18 to 25. So that's about 7 years. Because then, once I turned 21, I started to incorporate more of the weight training, and I became a personal trainer at that age. So, which was great because that led to, um, other things like learning about, not just the physical body, but then into the mental, because you and I did similar courses through the Czech Institute was one. And, they taught a lot about, holistic health. And it led to more like the mental and spiritual aspects.
Yep.
So about 7 years.
Yeah. So for me, what my total from when I maybe first had an inkling that I was in anxiety and depression was maybe 2003. Yeah, 2003. And I would say it just kind of went, for me, it went down until about 2008. That's when I sort of hit my rock bottom, 2008, 2009.
Hmm.
And then I started to come out of it then. And maybe 2013, 2014, probably 2014 was the first year that I was really like just feeling like I wasn't drowning anymore. Right.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so mine was about a 5 year downward spiral and about another 5 years sort of back up. So I mean it took time,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
yeah, so that was the sort of the time frame.
Hmm.
So Jim Carrey has a quote that says something along the lines of, depression is your avatar's message to tell you that it's tired of it's tired of playing the character that you're playing or the role that you're playing. So
Hmm.
I guess this is a quote more from a spiritual perspective. So
Yes.
do you have any thoughts or comments on sort of what he means by that? And
Yeah, that's very deep. I agree with that. It's exactly, what I realized I was doing, after I was out, after I healed, I realized that that's what happened. So the way I describe it in my teachings is that you are, you have a three-player team, which is, the soul, which in this case is an avatar, right? And then you have the mind, or in this case, ego identity. And then you have your body, which also makes up the ego as well. And what tends to happen is your mind is like the star player, right, on the team, whereas the soul is the captain and the heart of the team, and the body is like the workhorse. It just sort of, it's the one that, the mind says, or soul and mind say jump, it's going to jump. And when the mind starts to dominate and take over, uh, and at the expense of the body and the soul, then what ends up happening is you start making decisions uh, that, again, they upset the soul, they upset the captain of the team, right? Because the captain, your soul, is like uh, unique, right? We all have heart desires or soul desires that are unique to us, right? And it's like a fingerprint, so no one can tell you what that is. And when you live in a society which tells you that this is going to make you happy, or whatever, it could be this career, or uh, this level of status or fame or materialism, or whatever it is going to make you happy. um, that's what the mind hears, so the mind's going to drive after those things, and it doesn't really care if the soul doesn't agree with that, because it's like, oh, all right, well, common example I use is, if you had to choose between one career or another, let's just, I don't know, anything, doctor, lawyer. If for whatever reason you think that, or society thinks that a doctor is going to be held with higher regard than a lawyer, then the ego will say, well, whoa, okay, so that's a status bump there. And then the ego will look at, it's all like cold and calculated, more mathematical type decision
yep,
making, right? Or processes, like, then it looks at how much money they make, right? So it'll look at that, and it'll look at like all the things that again are just more uh, number based, right? Or ego inflation based, right? Like again, what makes you appear to be bigger or better than the people around you. And which is of course is all an illusion. I mean, the soul is the wise part and it sees right through that.
Right.
So anytime you try to uh, or the mind tries to dominate and make decisions that the soul doesn't agree with, and it's like, what are you doing, right? And yeah, so it starts to get tired of it if it continues to do that throughout your life, because you're really creating something that your heart doesn't even want. So yeah, there's
Right.
that inner conflict. You create that inner conflict. So to play life at a high level, you need to make sure that your three-player team is integrated and balanced. And really, that's the main message there. Because when the soul captains the team, tells the mind what to do, the mind could be an incredible thing. The ego is only a problem when it's unhealthy, right? You want to establish a healthy ego. Having an identity is still important, right? We are separate, right? Yeah, okay, you can see past it and see the oneness, but we are separate, and we have separate desires. We don't all want the same thing, right? And so you need to respect the ego as well. You got to respect all three players. You got to respect the soul. You got to respect the mind. You got to respect the body. Not one is greater than the other. What it is you need to know what their roles are, and you got to make sure that they're all playing that role. And when they are, and they're working together as a team, then your life is going to be a lot more enjoyable, and you're going to create pretty much whatever it is that you desire, because again, all three are a blessing. They're all incredible. Like
Right.
you should try to evolve all three. You should try to focus on evolving all three. And I say, as equally as possible, right? There's some people who only focus on fitness and that, and then they're a jerk and they treat everybody else like whatever, like garbage, let's just say. And then you have other people who are just focused on the spiritual, and they really neglect their body, right? So they could
Yeah.
be
Totally.
meditating all day, or I don't know, or just going to church, but they're feeding their body terrible or unhealthy foods. They're not getting enough movement in, so uh they're not challenging their body at all, right? And mental, maybe they're whatever, they're not challenging their mind in any way. They're not reading any books, or um learning philosophy, which I think is really important for character development. um it could be whatever, challenging themselves in some other way, like puzzles, or whatever, like any type of mental exercises. And yeah, I mean, just expanding their mind or awareness. So anyways, these are the things that I think are important to, um, again, balancing and integrating all three, so that you can live the life that you want, and so that your avatar, your soul, your heart, whatever you want to call it, doesn't get tired of your character. Don't
Yeah.
allow
Yeah.
don't allow the mind to drive the bus.
Yeah.
It's the soul that should be driving the bus, and that's not easy to do, because a lot of people are trapped in their mind, right? They don't realize that you're not your mind. A lot of people think that they're their identity, that there's not something that's beyond that. And there
Right.
is. There's something there that's beyond your identity. It's deeper.
Yep.
It's wise. And it's got everything that you're looking for, everything that you think you're going to gain in materialism, everything you
Yep.
think you're going to gain in the empty egoic promises, are all within. That's really the the trick. And really the irony in it, because everything that the ego promises is not outside you, it's not in the world around you, but it's within you, right? And then once you tap into that, then you can enjoy everything around you a lot more, even though you know that it's temporary and an illusion, right? Whereas with the mind, once you get something, it's not enough. You want more because you still
Yeah.
feel that emptiness, right? You sort of say, the ego plays these tricks, right? The unhealthy ego is like, okay, when you get to this point, you're going to be happy, right? Then you get to that point, or whatever it is, when you get this car, or whenever you get this house, or whenever you get this family, or whatever it is that you or the ego's telling you that's going to make you happy, right? It's all it's a lie, right? It's a lie that it's telling you, right? Because all those things you could have right now in this moment. You can tap into that at any time.
Yeah, I like what you said. A couple things there. One about the heart-driven desires and the soul-driven sort of desires for sure. If you have sort of like themes and experiences and a natural expression of your spirit that need to come out, and whether it's through just lack of connection with that or just the imprint from society is so strong, or like you said, your mind or ego are just so strong, the farther you get away from that sort of soul and heart driven desire, um, the farther you actually get away from who you really are, right? Who you were meant to be. And then when you're way off path, the ego, I think, just it gets this unhealthy attachment to the identity that of the false self.
Hmm.
And when you're really stuck in that, and that's a lot of what I was stuck in, I was I had an unhealthy attachment to um my my looks,
Hmm.
right? My aesthetics,
Yeah.
to my level of performance because I'm a personal trainer.
Hmm.
The athletics part, I had an unhealthy attachment to the competition and the addiction to adrenaline as a source of pleasure in my life. And just there's this unhealthy identity. Like you said, we need an identity to function in this reality, but then there's this unhealthy attachment to it where if you refuse to let go of it or can't see anything beyond that,
Hmm.
that's when you have those moments, at least for me, where that was all starting to break down on the inside level, where you just start to feel like right, the depression comes on and you just start to feel like hopeless and despair, and it's like what's going on. But that's that's the message, right? That there's a deeper part of yourself that you've been disconnected with. And
Yeah.
that's part of what I think uh like depression as a process is often sort of like a wake me up to, like, you're not living from your authentic self, you're not living from your
Hmm.
true self, you're living a false version of yourself. Even
Yeah.
if you believe it's real, your depression is telling you otherwise.
Yeah.
Right.
it a cool thing that I've heard was like it's really your soul screaming at you,
Yeah.
right? Like, hey, I'm here, like wake up, right? Like you're hurting me, right? And I'm gonna send you pain until you listen.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and as long as you're still looking for things on the outside to medicate, it
Hmm.
just you can't fill that void with anything on the outside at all, like you said, right? It's just
Hmm.
that just screams at you louder and louder. So the thing is, I guess it's just so uncomfortable for people to feel. They don't want to, right? They don't want to feel that. They just want to. For some people, it's just easier to turn themselves off and keep that connection shut and just continue, living
Hmm.
living the false life, I guess, right, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I think in the end, what comes is definitely a level of authenticity and connection to you, sort of the truer part of yourself and who you're meant to be and supposed to be, right?
Yeah, like I totally agree with that. For me, some people say, "Oh, I feel bad for you that you felt it at such a young age." And I didn't take it now. now that I look back, I say, I look at it as a blessing because it's almost like my intuition was so strong that it was telling me from such a young age that, hey, there's much more to you than uh, what people are teaching you around you, right? And uh, and that, from that, like I said, I feel like I'm blessed because um, it being there, it yelling at me, it saying, wake up, this life that you're leading um, is not, what you are. It's more of, what everybody else is pressuring you into doing, and therefore just sort of living, um, automatically, or living uh, based on what this, ego or the mind, which takes a life of its own, um, instead of being, like I said, a teammate for
Right.
the soul, it just takes over and dominates you. And anytime that happens, you are not going to feel good.
Yeah.
It's just, it is what it is. At least at a deep level, there
Right.
are a lot of egoic things that you feel good temporarily, and I indulged in those a lot, right? They helped me uh superficially numb the pain, right? I got into all sorts of things, and again, there were positives and negatives. I say chasing the positives and indulging in the negatives. And what that means is, chasing the positives could be going after certain goals, right? Like, positive goals. And in that, you're just distracted. You're so focused on achieving the goal that it makes you just focus on that and not on the pain.
Right.
And then you have, the negative indulgences, which are, alcohol, drugs. That's what it was for me. But for others, it could be more on partying too. It could be anything. It could be any addiction,
Yep.
gambling, or empty sex. It could be, no, just the list really goes
Goes on.
on and on, right? Or work, like you said,
Yep.
right?
Work,
Um,
making money,
yeah,
success.
like I said, yeah, any goal type thing. Yeah. So, and yeah, and until again, and the pain was just, again, my soul just yelling and saying, hey, wake up. uh we don't like the direction you're going. We don't like what you're feeling. This life could be so much more. And
Yeah.
yeah, so please listen to me, and rearrange your inner self, your inner world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know we kind of already maybe touched on this a bit when we were talking about sort of the different causes, whether it's physical or mental or spiritual.
Yes.
But is there any advice you can give to people in terms of things maybe that helped you overcome your depression that you can sort of maybe
um
pass on to help people?
yeah, okay, so I would definitely try to take a holistic approach. Now, it's one step at a time, obviously. So which one do you start with? Do you start with the physical? Do you start with the mental? Do you start with the spiritual? Um, Personally, I just think people should start with whatever they're most comfortable starting with, right? When you're depressed, you're, quite unmotivated. And again, you believe that nothing's going to change the way you feel.
Yeah.
So and obviously that's going to zap your motivation. That's why you feel that way. So I know, hopefully, with Dave and I here, like I said, I hit rock bottom. I mean, I was suicidal. I thought I had the same thoughts and feelings, and I could tell you there was a way out for me. Now, I'm not saying that this way out is going to be for you, but why not give it a try, even if you're, um, even if it helps you a little bit and helps you improve your life and enjoy it a little bit more, then it's worth the effort, right? At the end of the day, yeah, you just ask yourself, what's more appealing? Do I think like, exercise and nutrition or something that I want to start with, eat one or both, right? Uh, and then, or, no, I'm a reader. I really like reading. So, what books do you recommend I read, and then we can get into that, um, that I feel like are very, very helpful. Um, and and then spirituality, if it's that, then let's say you're comfortable meditating, you're comfortable praying, it could be prayer, whatever it is that, again, I feel like that would be the easiest for you to start with, because it's all about building momentum. Once you start elevating one of those aspects, I feel like, the exercise and the nutrition really helped me, because I felt good, and I felt better, even though I wasn't healed, I did feel a little bit better. It made me want to look into some other areas. I'm like, well, this definitely lifted me up a little bit. What else can I do? And then that's what you want to do. You want to definitely build momentum. So path of least resistance. Start with what you feel is going to be the easiest for you, and yeah, that's how I would start. And if you're not sure, that's why coaches like Dave and I are around, because again, we discussed in the previous video, I would consider Dave and I super coaches, right? And that term really means that, we've been through it. We didn't learn about depression in a book. We didn't learn how to treat depression in a book. This was our experience. We struggled. I didn't ask anyone for help. I went through this on my own. I don't recommend that, but
Yeah.
because of that, I really did leave no stone unturned. I looked in places that, I even knew, like, what are the chances it'd be here, and I still looked. Even in under stones, I knew I shouldn't have looked.
Right.
Some of the negatives, right? Drugs and so forth, and all kinds of like I said, negative stimulants, and those didn't work. Obviously, they were just superficial. Um, but yeah, so that's what I would do. I definitely would at least try to get some guidance, or even a starting point. Where should I start? Should
Yeah.
I start with the physical, the mental, and the spiritual? Because I mean, it's guidance, right? And it's more than just guidance. It's wisdom.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I really do think there's a real big, um, powerful source just between the two of us, or anyone else who has been through it and gotten over it.
Yeah, for sure. I think at least I can say for me, like I said at the beginning, I even when people started to recognize that something was off with me and maybe suggested that I go get help, and I refused because I was too ashamed and too stubborn.
Hmm.
um, that would have helped my process immensely. Like I made it far more difficult than it had to be because I did not accept help from anybody else. Um, learning the hard way, you don't really have to, not in that situation, right? It just kind of extends it. Um, okay, yeah. So next question is, uh, what advice would you give someone who is experiencing suicidal thoughts, if they have depression? Because this is something that I had for sure.
Mhm.
Um, Came up quite a bit, especially when I was in 2008, 2009, when I was at my lowest. Um, I didn't really have any tools or ability to cope with, and the only reason I didn't do anything is because I was too chicken shit too. Right? I'd like to say I had some type of coping skill or technique, but really I was just too afraid to do anything. And that is not going to be everybody.
Yes.
And so do you have any advice or any words to say for people on those dealing and coping with those types of thoughts?
Yeah. So, you know, share it with other people who are going to be supportive. I think establishing a support group is very important, even if that is just one person or whatever it is. But make sure uh, they want what's best for you, um, and they're not overly emotional. They're non-judgmental. So make sure that it's a real positive influence, even if it's just someone who doesn't offer you anything except um, you know an ear, right? To just
Yeah.
listen to what you have to say and express how you're feeling. Um, so I would say that's definitely something to do. The other thing is, do not be deceived by your unhealthy ego. The mind is not wise. It doesn't know best. You know, it, you think that you're going to be in this um, darkness forever. I know I was there. So, but now that you know that other people have gotten through it, focus on that. Know that, the only constant in the universe is change. Everything is changing all the time. So you can too. Um, you're alive. You're a product of life, and life is either evolving or de-evolving, and you are capable of choosing which direction you want to go at any moment. So I would focus on what we said before. Pick one, two, three, whatever of things you want to take, like steps. It could be I'm just going to go for a walk. um, it's simple things, right? I'm going to stop eating junk food, whatever. It could be one, two, three things, whatever it is that are going to improve your life, are going to make you feel better, and start with that. Think that you're going to build momentum. Remember, you reap what you sow. It's a law of the universe. No matter what, if you put in the work, if you take the right steps, if you um, treat your body, mind, and soul the right way, they will let you know. They will let you know. You'll start to feel better because they'll communicate that to you.
Right.
Yeah, and the reason I created V10 Health was because I literally did a scale from V1 all the way up to V10, and what that looks like for the physical body, for the mind, for the spirit. And when you're depressed, it just means you're at a lower level in one or more of those categories. If you do the right things, you're going to move up in those scales on each of them. What's going to end up happening is you're going to feel better and better and better. And I'll tell you right now, it's just like if someone felt really poorly physically, and obviously I did a test on them and they were a V1. Like, whoa, when I assessed them, you're at a V1. You're sedentary, you don't move enough, right? This is why you feel this way. So all you have to do is start moving more, and guess what? These negative symptoms are going to go away, right? Or they're going to start to at least get reduced, right, in severity, um, and in number. So as you climb up in these sections, what ends up happening is you just start feeling better and better. I can tell you right now that if you're in the higher levels, if you're a V7, V8, in all three of those sections, then I would pretty much guarantee you're not going to be depressed,
Yeah.
because it's just science, right? It's universal laws. It's beyond science. It's even deeper than science.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's just the way life works. Again, you reap what you sow. Just please just make sure that you know that this can change and you have the power to change. It's within.
yeah,
But you have to stop listening to your mind and start tuning into your soul. And all the answers really are there. And that's probably the best advice that I can give. The other thing is, do whatever it takes to stay alive.
yeah,
Some people may be against medications or whatever, but and I'm not. If you're really suicidal and there's you're trying a bunch of different things or whatever, and you're at that point, I mean, do whatever it takes to stay alive. Then once you're on the medications and you've somewhat stabilized or whatnot, then you could start doing the same thing. You could start working, and then hopefully in the future you can wean off of them and you don't need them anymore. But if you need them right now, then do it. But don't think that that's going to be um, a way to heal this for good.
right.
Hey, if you don't want to heal and you just want to get by, you want to survive and not thrive, then that's up to you too. I'm not here to judge, but I'm saying if you want to thrive, then yeah, you would look to evolve, and hopefully one day you won't need those medications as a crutch anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, definitely like what you said there. It's a lot of the negative thoughts that come in my mind are a byproduct of poor vitality overall, whether it's physical, mental, spiritual, or emotional, right? When all of those are down, to me, that's when the all of the dark thoughts and the suicidal thoughts start to arise. Is if someone is really high vitality and really connected to their heart, those types of thoughts, there's no space for them to exist, right? They can't get in you. So I think just for me, there was a couple things, uh, especially there's a few sort of destructive patterns that I noticed for myself, and um, one of them was to think, or sorry, destructive thoughts, and one of them was definitely, and as you pointed out earlier, you think it's going to last forever, right? And that's a thought that comes into your head a lot. At least
Hmm.
it came into my head, and because it can last a while, um, you think because it's going to last forever, why would I want to feel this way forever? Therefore, why don't I just end my pain and suffering now, right? But
Yeah,
that all stems from, in my mind, it was the root of that was this is just going to last forever. And
exactly.
I remember a friend sending me an email saying this too shall pass, and my immediate response was fuck you.
Yeah, you don't know what I'm going through.
This is not going to pass. This is going to keep going. But
Hmm.
that's because I was buying into that idea too much,
Yes.
right? I was believing that too
Yeah.
much, and I was identifying with that it was going to last forever too much. It doesn't last forever. If we look at this as a process of connecting with your soul and a process of natural transformation from, you know, the ego identity self to living from the true self,
Hmm.
then that process doesn't take forever, right? It only takes longer as long as you resist it.
Yes.
Um, and so the more you resist it, the more the pain will come and the longer it will last, but it doesn't last forever. So if you find yourself feeling and hearing, having the thoughts that this is going to last forever, immediately in my mind, I would say just detach from that and say, no, wait a minute. Like, don't buy into that. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, even if you can't see it, right?
Yeah.
I think for me, there was a hyper focus on the negative. Um, and that comes just because you're feeling so dark and depressed and despair all the time. Um, but in my own mind, there was when I noticed I was attaching to the darkness versus just feeling the darkness. Um, I would say something like, I am depressed. But if I was just feeling the darkness, I would just say, I feel low. I feel like shit. right? There's the I am statement and the I feel statement. And in my
Yeah.
mind, if you just express what you feel, that is far better than saying I am, because as soon as you say I am something, you're attaching your identity to it, and it just kind of magnifies it a little bit.
Hmm.
So just careful wording and just expression of the feeling. But in general, like you said, the mind, you shouldn't really take any of your thoughts seriously. Very few of them, right? I mean, there's like 60,000 thoughts a day that go through the mind or something like that.
Yes.
Like the vast majority of those thoughts will come and go on their own. And in meditation, this is one of the things that helped me, was to learn to detach from any thought and just watch it passively rise and fall and passively rise and fall. And here's another thought, and then it goes away, and then here's another thought about a completely different topic whatsoever. And when I started to notice that's a way of sort of, you're, instead of being in the middle of being surrounded by your thoughts, now you're outside of your thoughts and you're looking at them as a point of reference, sort of away from your awareness. And
Hmm.
it just learning to detach from all of your thoughts and just not take them seriously. So if you're having the suicidal thoughts, if you can just pull away from that and not take that as a serious thought at all, it's just an expression of how you're feeling.
Yes.
Rather than something that you actually have to do, right? It's just an
Yes.
expression of your feeling. And then later on, after I came out of it, I actually got I read something from shamanism that was very helpful. And
Hmm.
that when you have thoughts, or if you're imagining yourself, taking some pills or slitting your wrist or jumping off a cliff or whatever, um, whenever you see yourself dying in your imagination, that is expressive of ego death.
Hmm.
And I got that from Shaw. I can't remember what the book was, but when I understood later that a lot of those thoughts were just the expression of my old identity dying, like a
Hmm.
part of you does die off, but not your physical body.
Hmm.
Right? It's sort of like in my mind, this is just how I interpreted it. It was like a part of my ego, a part of my personality had to die off.
Hmm.
And in my mind, whenever I was having those suicidal thoughts, uh, that was just also sort of an expression of that, uh,
Hmm.
manifesting in my brain and in my thoughts. And
Yes.
I mean, that may not be the same for everybody, but for me, for some reason, that helped. It made sense to me. I was like, oh, okay. I felt like I was dying. A part of me was dying, like in a way, right?
Yes.
uh,
No, I
um,
I I really do believe that um, it's it's sort of there's different ways that I've seen it expressed in books, like the caterpillar becoming the butterfly, right? The caterpillar is transformed into something else, but that state where it was just crawling around and that's all it was doing is dead,
right.
in a sense, right? But like you say, you're still living and you're still going about your life, but you're flying instead of crawling. And I really do like that analogy. I agree with you. One thing you touched on there was how the ego really loves attachment, right? Attaching the way you feel with, I have this, or I am, like you said,
Yeah,
depressed. It's part of establishing its identity, right? It's
it is.
control.
Yep.
And yeah, you can't listen to it because it definitely is a liar. If anything, the soul stripped of the ego is anything but depressed.
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
right? It's because I've been on both sides. I've been ego driven and I've been soul driven, and I can tell you it's literally the difference between hell and heaven. um, when you're soul driven, you experience a deep connection to everything. You experience unconditional love. You experience real joy, peace, wisdom, all these amazing feelings that I never felt when I was depressed.
Yeah.
And I could tell you, like, I felt happiness, but I never felt it to even remotely close to the level I did after I healed. So yeah, and that's because my soul was so buried. It was completely buried and suppressed. And then yeah, once I broke free, then I realized, oh, this is why I felt so bad, was because this part of me was suppressed. Another analogy is um, used by a flame, right? A person with a flame. So if the ego goes close to the flame or the fire, picture yourself in a field and there's a fire, and you go close to the fire, you warm up, right? And you feel good, right? And if you go the further away you walk from the fire, then the colder you become, and
Right.
you keep going further and further away, then frostbite starts to set in and things like that, and they're quite painful, and the longer you stay away, and the more pain you're going to get. So
Yeah.
it really is the fire within you, your soul, calling you to say, hey, wake up, you need to start including me in your life.
Yeah.
Because this isn't good. If you continue to go, if you continue to not walk toward me and stay where you're at, you're going to freeze to death. So, in a sense, it's like, can it go on forever? Yes. If you if you don't listen
If you
and
resist, yeah,
and you
in a way.
resist, then yeah, it technically can last a very long time. For me, when I healed and when I realized what I had to do, I literally ran to the fire. I healed, and I'm not saying everyone's going to do this, but I healed over 3 days. I call them 3 days of eternity, because my you know, time stopped for me. And that was a very bizarre spiritual situation, which I won't get into in this video. Maybe we can do one in another video. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was, it all, and everyone's going to do it at a different pace. But yeah, if you start, moving toward the center, toward your soul, the more you do that, the better and better you're going to feel. And
Right.
yeah, yeah. So that's, it's tough. The ego wants to control. It definitely wants to control. It doesn't want to lose its sense of identity.
Yeah.
And that shamanic saying, right? It's great, right? Yeah. Some people call it an egoic death.
Yeah.
Um, I just like I don't know. I just like the term transformation, but yeah, it is a death, because the point of when what healed me eventually was conscious unity. And uh conscious unity is where you literally connect to your soul, and your soul connects to the great spirit, the universe around you, if you will. And that process requires you to surrender, and to surrender your ego, to surrender your um your identity completely, where you're like,
Yeah.
I don't care about it anymore. I realize that I'm listening to this voice in my head, and no matter what it tells me to do, I feel terrible after.
Yeah.
Yeah, I realize, like, it doesn't know what it's doing. You have to admit that, like, okay,
Yeah.
and that's what it was, because I hit rock bottom, because I realized, listening to this voice, I'm not going to feel good, because even when my life was going really, really well, actually, even more so when my life was going really, really well, whenever my ego said, oh, when you get that, you're going to be happy. Oh, when you achieve that, you're going to be happy. Well, what happened was I'd get there, and then it was like, oh my goodness, I don't feel any better. So
Yeah.
that made it even worse. That sort of uh, reinforced the idea that I was never going to get any better. So,
Yeah.
you feel even more hopeless and helpless. So, whenever I was chasing the positives and I was successful, I actually felt worse and
Right.
more empty and more pain, right? And yeah, so again, I totally agree with what you just said. Um, the ego is when it's unhealthy, it is the trickster. It wants to be the star of the show, right? It's the superstar. It's ultra talented. The mind is ultra talented, but it's a tool, and it's not a tool that's designed to captain the team that I expressed before.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's designed to listen to the soul, which is wise, and the soul tells the mind what to do. It's supposed to be more of a team player, because when it's like I said, it's an unbelievable thing, right? That's why I hate when people say, the ego is bad, and no, it's just healthy and unhealthy. I prefer that statement, because when the ego is healthy, it helps the soul uh, get whatever it desires, which is authentic and a beautiful thing. It's usually creating more for itself, for yourself, and for your loved ones, and for humanity, and everything around you as a whole. Because it's just inherently uh, good,
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
will, right?
yeah,
Inherently
yeah.
creative and positive. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, what you touched there basically on the chasing the positives and the avoiding the negatives. I think that's sort of a program that's built into us from a very young age.
Hmm.
And there's you got to know at what point you have to turn around and dive into the negatives. Right, you've got to dive into the pain, and you've got to dive into the suffering, and just sort of face it, and go through that. Right, if you're constantly chasing pleasure and looking for the quick fix and the instant gratification, then that's a path that only leads you into more despair ultimately, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this question, so one of the things that I noticed, I'll just do a little preamble to this question. Afterwards, coming out of my depression, um, I wasn't really ever aware of the effect that I had on people around me.
Hmm.
Uh, Self-depression tends to, and I think it's part of the process, is you have to be really focused on yourself for a time. It really, you sort of, at least for me, I withdrew from people. I didn't like being around people at all. I wanted to be by myself most of the time.
Hmm.
That's maybe not the same for everybody, but and when I was around people, I guess as a defense mechanism for shame, because I didn't want people to see how I was, uh, I didn't always I didn't always behave in the best way,
Yeah, yeah,
and I did in fact hurt some people, and I said some pretty bad things to people,
absolutely.
and that was the depression acting out.
Yes.
So
Misdirect, it's a misdirected pain, right?
yeah, so
Yeah.
what advice can you give to the friends and family of someone who's going through depression
Oh,
if
yeah,
they're experiencing that type of thing, or even just to help the person with depression?
yes. Okay, because I was, a silent sufferer, I went through it on my own, like I said before. I never really asked anyone for help, so I don't have any personal experience of, who I asked for help, and what I felt was the best when, this person did this and I hated when they did that. Um, so, however, I do have some insight in terms of, just when I'm coaching other people, what they respond to best. And I find that, just being loving and supportive helps. You want to motivate or inspire them, but at the same time, you don't want to uh, push them, right? Because if you
Yeah,
push them, yeah, they're gonna just retreat even more, and that's not good. So you got to be empathetic, compassionate, and I think one of the most important things I would say is, don't be judgmental. I mean, if you're judgmental, they're not going to trust you anytime they're going to share something with you, right?
yeah,
Because as soon as they share something with you, and you start judging them, they're going to be like, okay, no, I'm never going to share anything with them again. um yeah, and it's also important, like we were talking about suicide before. If you feel they're on the brink, or if it actually express it to you, which is possible. Often it's not the case. People usually hide that they're going to commit suicide because they know that people are going to try to stop them. But if you feel like they're really low, then definitely get help. Don't put it off. Uh, yeah, just say you're going to be by their side and you're going to go with them, and then give them different options. What would you feel best doing? Who do you want to work with, right? Do you want to work with um, a psychologist or psychotherapist, or a super coach like Dave and I, or um, whatever, or a group? You want to go to some form of depression group where sort of like an AA, right, where you just go and you share your struggles and with other people, and it's just everyone supports one another, and you go through a sort of a process, like they have the 12-step program there with Alcohol Anonymous, right?
Yeah.
Alcoholics Anonymous. So yeah, that's pretty much, I think, sums it up. I don't know. Do you think there's anything else you would add to that?
Yeah, back just with you talked about being non-judgmental, I think is really, really important, because
Hmm.
there's already a certain amount of judgment and inner criticism,
Yeah.
and that doesn't need to be magnified in any way. So
No,
I
no.
I think doing your best to provide a safe space, to have the person feel safe and comfortable being around you, like you said,
Hmm.
even if it's just listening and not
Hmm.
saying anything,
Hmm.
having just being safe. You know, with a person in pain, they often project it outwards. I didn't really understand that until afterwards. So if they're acting up or acting out, that's the pain talking. So I wouldn't take anything they say seriously or personally.
Yes.
It's a way of driving them away from you, or
Hmm.
in my case, a way of driving them
Hmm.
away from me, so I didn't have to show them my depression,
Yeah.
or how I was feeling. Right, it was sort of a self-protective mechanism. But
Yes.
yeah, you can't really take anything they say personally. Um, and I would say be kind and gentle, like very gentle. I think
Yes.
people that are, just anyone, even if they're not depressed, if they're down at a V1, like if their just vitality is really low, they need kid gloves. Uh,
Hmm.
didn't don't put any huge expectations or add any weight to the burden they're already carrying, because the burden they're already carrying, even though you can't see it, is already crushing them.
Yes.
So no, like, don't put any, this is what you should be doing with your life, or any of those type of expectations. If they person feels like they're drowning all the time, and you're just adding more weight to that, you're just
Yeah.
pushing them under the water, right? So
Hmm.
be supportive, be kind, and helping, and just be very gentle. It's baby steps.
Yes.
Small baby steps frequently is the way to move through this, right? It's not going to be leaps and bounds here. It's just
Hmm.
you've got to really just have an open mind to let them progress at the rate that they need to progress with. If you can push a little bit but not too much, but if you can kind of negotiate and learn to know when the person starts to back off, when you've done push too much, then that's helpful. I mean, that does require a bit of skill, but yeah, that's kind of all I would say there.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. What you said was, really good. And with, they're already going through a lot, and you don't want to add any more pressure, right? So a lot of people think, when you talk about the ego, that the ego is this, thing that's, bigger. It wants to be bigger than everyone else, and that's really because it's small, right? It likes to,
Yeah.
pretend that it's bigger than everything else. But sometimes it could be the opposite, where it's, judging itself, like you said, a lot, self-critical, and it falls into this victim role, and it likes to, again, what we were talking about before, label itself as, I am a depression
Right.
sufferer, and it, loves falling in love with these types of stories, right? Because it feels, uh, it it feels empowered either way. It feels empowered whenever you attach yourself to something that again makes you distracted from what you actually are, and that is your soul.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, that's really good, and yeah, I like that baby steps. Everything you said, I totally agree with that. Yeah, and the other thing was yeah, being empathetic, like not being sympathetic, where you take on their problems, like detach yourself from the results. So if you told them to do something and they didn't follow through and didn't listen, don't take it personally. Like, you were saying, if they lash out at you, same thing. If you told them to take a certain step and they don't do that, don't take it personally. Be empathetic, and just say, okay, that's fine, we'll try again tomorrow. And that's it, right? You
Yeah.
move forward. You don't judge. Don't, it's like, oh, I told you to do this and you didn't do it, and again, that's just going to have negative uh consequences.
Right.
Yeah, it's again, you got to show this unconditional love and kindness, like you stated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what would you say? Like, what are some of the key lessons that you maybe learned from your depression, and how did your depression change you?
Oh, okay. So, uh, for me, I mean, the big thing was, living in complete silence, uh, and being inauthentic, um, and again, being ego driven. I went from living in utter hell to now living in heaven. So I do feel like knowing the different states has been a great blessing. I feel like I can help a lot of other people who've been through the same thing, or are going through uh, similar circumstances. I also learned that if the depression didn't stop me and kill me, like there's nothing that can. I mean, it
Yeah.
was the greatest struggle of my life. There's nothing out there, no greater battle than the one between your ego and your soul. If you can overcome that, I mean, everything after that is clear sailing.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
really, really. And I yeah, I mean, now today, I really enjoy my life. I create whatever I want. I can. It's not like I don't hear the ego. It does sneak up on me. I'm not perfect.
Oh yeah.
It's still there. There's unhealthy aspects that are still there, that try to sway me at times, or I fall into traps. But now I see them and I'm like, oh man, again, like really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, fine. And then you move on. You get out of it and you continue forward. And every once in a while you're reminded again and again and again. It's just part of being human. But at least now I know what I'm doing. I'm aware of it, and I can change it immediately. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm doing this again, right? Like the other day, I caught myself projecting too much into the future.
Yeah.
And what happened was I started getting caught up in it, and I was like, oh, and then I was like, oh, why do I feel so terrible today? And then I realized, I was like, oh yeah, I lost my direction. I'm like, I'm not in the now, right? I'm not focusing on what I'm grateful. I have so many things that I'm blessed for, and I'm like, when I start focusing on that, I'm like, oh yeah, okay,
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
things are so small. Like, just be happy now, appreciate what you have now. And in that sense, you also start to attract more of it too,
Yeah.
because
I guess.
when you start to project in the future of what you think you're going to lack, then you're going to just attract that all the time, and that's not a good thing, right? It can go either way too. It can be future, it could be past. Some people like to reminisce on the past. They're like, oh, remember when this and that, and that's fine. But I could see a lot of people will will really get caught up in that. And it's like, okay, but what's going on right now? What's
Yeah.
great with your life right now? It's because, and the reason that happens is like, they usually reminisce to a point where they were really young and they didn't have a lot of responsibilities, or the life they had they enjoyed, and now they have really nothing to share because they've created a life that is ego driven, and they dislike it, and they also can't see a future that they enjoy either, because
Right.
they think it's just going to continue on, and they don't see a real positive end in sight, so they reminisce in the past. So it could go either way, and that causes a lot of stress too, and it can cause depression as well, because now you're attaching yourself to the past and or the future, and that could lead to, again, just making your depression more of a burden. So I've learned to not get caught up in that, and that again is from all the practices, right? The spiritual practices like meditation that you touched upon, even a lot more in the anxiety uh, part, in the first part, and that's what really helps you, just to focus on being in the moment and saying, oh, look, I mean, I have everything that I need to be here right now and be safe. Like, let's start with that, right? I'm breathing. Let's start with that. What else can you be grateful for? And just start to look for all the things that you have. If you have a roof over your head, you have a bed that you're sleeping in, you have whatever, AC and heating, like whatever it is that you have, look for that food, like on your table, like, whatever it is. Um, Look for all the blessings that you have in your life, and that will start to change how you feel, because now you're going from what I have versus what I don't have.
Yeah.
It's completely different. If you start thinking of the lack in your life, you're gonna feel bad. Try the exercise
Yeah.
and try feeling, and then try stating what, and list what you do have, and see how your mood just shifts automatically.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think for me, depression was, and the anxiety and the depression was it was the thing that changed me from living life outside in to living life inside out,
Nicely said.
if that makes sense. Because all of my attention and focus was on what was around me and not was what was within me.
Hmm.
Uh, and that was a big shifting point, and that has stayed with me. Where, like you said, you learn when your mind's going off to the future or drifting off to the past, or you just you just get such a level of connection and even intuitive connection with your inner world,
Hmm.
and you live from that, as opposed to looking for the outside, for the fulfillment and the happiness and all that.
Hmm.
You raise the bar on your sort of set point level of happiness and peace, and you try and carry that with you from experience to experience, and moment to moment. But like you said, sometimes you get thrown off, which happens because that's life and we're human.
Hmm.
But through practice, you learn to get back to that point closer and a little quicker each time, right? Or
Yes.
stay there a bit longer. And I think with the mind driven way of living, and the ego way driven way of living is very, like you said, the goal oriented, the achievement, chasing the pleasure. And in my mind, it was always, here's the goal, here's the steps I have to work towards to get that, and then I get the goal. You get the momentary, aha, this feels great. The ego fluffs up, but
Yeah.
then the moment's gone, and then what next?
Then the
Um,
emptiness kicks in.
yeah, and then the
Yeah.
emptiness kicks in. So here comes the next goal that I have to achieve, and that is all in a way sort of mapped out in the mind, because I can figure out what steps to do to get whatever result. And when you're living from your heart and your soul, it's, you don't know, right? You don't
Mhm.
know how things are going to work out a lot of the time. And I mean, suffering is the sledgehammer that cracks open the ego.
Mhm.
so the soul can come in and take over. And when you're sort of living from that way, when your ego starts and your identity and everything you have unhealthy attachment to starts to break down, there's a lot of unknown, because the ego likes the control and it likes the certainty and it likes the identity. For me, is that stepping into living life in terms of walking forward and not knowing what's going to happen next at that point was a really scary thing. And I think there's a lot of strength and courage you can get from that experience, and learning to trust, like you said, and surrender. And when you have that soul impulse, or you just feel without any logical reason
Mhm.
this is something you should do, you follow it. You don't know where it's going to take you. You don't know what the results are going to be. You don't know who you're going to be through the experience or who you're going to be at the end of it. It's a different way of living than when you're living from your ego and your mind. And for me, that's probably the other big difference, is how I actually approach and live my life and move forward from one moment to moment. Uh, I still have things I like to, maybe some goals I have, but I'm not so attached to them. And if I'm still happy whether I get them or not.
Yes.
uh,
As long as you're living and living authentically, and if you're trying to go after them, then you're going to be happy, right? As long as
yeah,
you're not engaging in activities that take you away from it, that are ego driven, yeah, you're going to be happy, absolutely.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's a deeper connection to self for me coming through
Mhm.
that. And it's just a way of perceiving and moving through life and navigating life that is also fundamentally different from how I operated before. I think those are some of the biggest changes that I have, and just being more at peace and more happy and
Mhm.
more content with things too, right? So
Yeah, no, it's definitely like I said, a world of a difference. um yeah, from like I said, I can't describe it any more than going from hell to heaven,
yeah,
um because that's how extreme it is. So said it's a different life. When I remember back, it literally is a completely different person. um and I remember once I came out fresh from the other side, it was sort of like I asked myself, oh, what now? Like, I'm out of here. It's like, what now? It's like, oh, I'm in control. Here's my soul is taken over. What now? Like, what do I do first? Right? Because now it's like I'm free. I'm out of the cage. Where I can go anywhere I want. I can create anything I want. And it's like, what now? It was just it was that moment where it was like it felt great, because I was like, oh wow, this is amazing. I tuned into this deep, wise, like it said, peaceful, loving part of me, and now I can create whatever I want. What do I want to do? And I actually ask myself, and like you said, you ask yourself, you go inward, and you start uh, trying to discover what it is that you really love, not what's going to make you the most money, or provide the most fame, uh, and things like that. It's just like, what do I really love, and what do I really want to create,
yeah,
and that's a beautiful feeling, and I wish that upon anyone who's suffering from depression at this time.
yeah. Yeah, that's really good. Good way of putting it, for sure. So do you have any closing thoughts? Anything else you would like to offer, or tell
um
anybody, or and just to sort of to wrap up the conversation?
you know what, I just want to say, first of all, that this has been really fun. I've had a pleasure doing this with you. I think we should do more of these, because uh, I love hearing your perspective on things, because
Yeah,
I learned from you as well. And yeah, really, like, I just hope to do more of these in the future. uh, and that's it. And the other thing would be, like, to the people watching this, is that yeah, don't feel like this isn't going to end. We talked about this a lot in this video. You can change. There's nothing greater than human potential. life has the capability of growing to levels that we don't even know. We don't know how far life can grow or go. There's no set limit. So you are part of that, and don't listen to the ego. You don't know what your soul knows. The infinite wisdom that your soul's connected to, the universal intelligence, God, call it what you will. Yeah, whatever you want. It doesn't have to be a old man with a long beard. It could just be, like I said, whatever makes you feel the most comfortable. And just know that things can change if you take the right steps. And yeah, just do that. Surround yourself with the people who are gonna help you evolve. If there are people that are around you that pull you down, it's going to take a little bit of strength to start avoiding them. I know it's difficult if you're living with them and they're around you, but just do your best to spend less time with people who bring you down and more time with people who are going to help you evolve. Yeah, I think that's like sums up some of what we were saying today.
Yeah, yeah.
And you
Yeah.
want
I
to
mean,
add?
the potential for the human spirit to overcome anything is immense and incredible. And once you start to tap into that sort of true nature of self, that is more than just mind and body and emotions, um, that is so immense and so enormous
Yeah,
that it it literally can handle anything. Where however big your problem is, or however awful you think it is, if you can build a bridge and a connection to that, as we said earlier, we both did the physical, the mental, emotional, and then what got us to where we are now is the spiritual part. So take care of all of them, look at all of them, do whatever you're most comfortable with first. But the potential for the human spirit to overcome any challenge it's there. And if you can just open yourself up to that and tap into that and let that guide you through the process, the light at the end of the tunnel will appear for sure,
mhm,
100%. And then, like you said, once you see that light, you just make a beeline for it.
yeah,
Once it's
exactly.
there, it's like fucking hell, there it
Yeah,
is.
there it is.
There
Yeah,
it is. And then then nothing stops you, right? You just keep going, and eventually it's there right in front of you.
yeah,
And then it
and
is you.
yeah, it is you, and that's when you realize, like, you've been running around in circles for so long, and realize why you felt this void is because, oh, it's because I wasn't in front of the light. I wasn't one with this. Like
Yeah.
I've been away from the fire, right? It just hits you, and you're like, oh, I get it now. It's my
Yeah.
own fault. I was listening to the wrong part of me,
Yeah.
and but that's okay. That's part of the journey. It makes it more meaningful when you get there. Um, yeah, it's yeah, beautifully said, Dave. Really, yeah, well said.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And I mean, I enjoy these conversations too. I learn as much from you as well. Everybody's going to have their own unique experience of it, and their own lessons, and the ways they manage through it. Um, if someone wants to contact you, how would they get in touch with you?
So just look up www.v10health.com, and you could contact me directly through the website. And yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. I also have an Instagram account. You could DM me there. It's V10 at V10 Health. Um, yeah, I mean that's pretty much. I'm very accessible, so I usually get back to you within a day or two. But if it's, obviously something that's a little bit more, serious, I'll get back to you, as soon as possible.
Excellent. Good.
Yeah.
And Yep, my website, awakeningenergy.net, and Instagram at Dave Hurdle. So yeah, thanks Sal for having the chat. I appreciate it. We'll definitely do this again sometime. I don't know what we'll talk about, but I'm sure it'll be great.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you too, Dave. Always a pleasure. And yeah, I do look forward to doing many more of these. And yeah, working with you again and hopefully enlightening, inspiring, and helping people evolve.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Sal, and
Thank you.
take care.
You too. Bye.